Us on our bi-weekly PocketLab webinar, and we have a ton more people than we normally get on our standing webinar. So that meant we hit on a good and interesting topic. So I'd like to welcome everybody here, and if you can put in the chat where you're from, change the chat settings so that it goes to everyone, so we can see who's here, and say something that you're looking forward to during the summer. We just had our solstice yesterday, right? And so we're officially in the summer. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on our bi-weekly PocketLab webinar, and we have a ton more people than we normally get on our standing webinar. So that meant we hit on a good and interesting topic. So I'd like to welcome everybody here, and if you can put in the chat where you're from, change the chat settings so that it goes to everyone, so we can see who's here, and say something that you're looking forward to during the summer. We just had our solstice yesterday, right? And so we're officially in the summer. So my name is Clifton Roosboom. I'm the founder and CTO of PocketLab. And with me, I have two of my esteemed colleagues, Christina Mitchell, Dr. Christina Mitchell, who is our Director of Learning Innovations, and Jason Barr, who is our Content Curriculum Specialist and Manager. And today we're going to talk about OpenSciEd, and you might hear us abbreviated OSE, so that's cool person lingo for OpenSciEd, and why we're getting involved with OpenSciEd, and what a little bit about our PocketLab platform and how OpenSciEd and PocketLab Notebook will work together. So as we go through our agenda, please throw your questions in the chat, and our amazing Scott Kessig is in the chat to help support you as you put questions in there, and then he'll aggregate all the questions that you put in there, and then at the end we'll do some Q&A with our colleagues here. So with that, we'll get started, and so just a quick introduction about why we're so excited about OpenSciEd and the partnership that we've launched. OpenSciEd is like some of the highest quality instructional materials curriculum out there, and we've been working with them to take the content that they've masterfully developed over the many years and put it together with what we think is an intuitive and very easy to use delivery platform, both for teachers and students, which we have worked on for many, many years in PocketLab Notebook. And so Dr. Christine Mitchell will go through in more depth OpenSciEd and some of the pedagogical approaches that they take. And then Jason will talk about OpenSciEd specifically within PocketLab Notebook. And we're really excited and proud that we've taken a holistic approach where, you know, the content and the way that you use the content, they have to be considered together. So we've been working with OpenSciEd and bringing features into Notebook that really serve their content, and then figuring out how to really optimize the whole experience for you, the teacher, trying to do this, implement it in your classroom, because this can be a new way of teaching for some people. And then for the student, for them to get, you know, to the core of the learning that's embedded with OpenSciEd. So with that, I will hand it off to Dr. Mitchell, and Jason and I will go off screen, and then Jason will pop up, and then we will all return for some Q&A at the end. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Cliff. So I'm going to share my screen here for you. And what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit of the pedagogy of OpenSciEd and why I think it might be a good fit for your district. Some of you might have a lot of familiarity with OpenSciEd already, in which case this is a great time for you to go like get a drink from the fridge. But if you don't know a lot about OpenSciEd or you just want to think a little more deeply about it, That's kind of what I'm going to try to provide is a little bit of what is OpenSciEd, what's it all about, what's the instructional method like. So when I think about science curriculum, so I come from a research science background, but I've been working in science curriculum now for about 4 years. And the two biggest things that I always want students to leave their science curriculum knowing are these two questions. I want them to know what is science and who can do science. Because when I was teaching, so I taught scientific research methods. I still do. I teach at San Jose State University. I taught for 6 years at Texas Tech, go Red Raiders. And the two things that my students struggled with most were these two questions. They didn't know what science is. So they thought that, science is, I look in a microscope, I write down the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and there we go. And there we go. That's it. I did science. Instead, I wanted my students to come to my class knowing that science is a process, that it's a way of answering questions, that's a way of understanding the world around us. And that the difference between the disciplines in science is just what questions do we ask? In biology, we're asking questions about living things. In chemistry, we're asking questions about chemical reactions. In psychology, we're asking questions about the way the human mind works. So having them leave K-12 science knowing that science is a process and a way of answering questions is so central, and OpenSciEd does this really well. The second thing I think that students really struggle with, and maybe a lot of you have this experience as well, is that a lot of students perceive that science is something that other people do. Somebody in a white coat with glasses that, comes from a fancy background and went to a fancy school, that's the person who does science. I just learn about the science. They did it. I learn about it. And we don't want our students to be thinking that. We want our students to know that they can do science, that anyone can do science, that it isn't limited to someone who looks different than you or who comes from a different background than you, that you, your student, can do science. And when they get to my classroom in college, they are fully prepared to learn more about how to do that science. So OpenSciEd does this really well. I'm going to talk about a few of the ways that OpenSciEd encourages students to think about what science is. So when I was doing research science at Texas Tech and at San Jose State, the first thing that happens is I think, something curious. I observe something really curious and unusual. So in NGSS, we would call that a phenomenon. And the very next thing I do is I go talk to my colleagues about it. I go, hey, have you ever thought about this? Have you ever observed this? How do you think we could research this? That's part of doing science, just discussing with others. And OpenSciEd starts science the same way. Students discuss as a class. Students work with elbow partners in small groups, and science starts with that discussion in OpenSciEd. And another thing that's really important in science is doing those hands-on activities. So that's the next thing I would do is I would start collecting data and analyzing that data. I would actually do the investigation and lead with that. And that's what OpenSciEd does. The next thing the students do is they're going to be using, this is an example of our PocketLab G-force cars. They're going to be using those cars to find out what happens when the car twirls around in a circle upside down. And then the last thing that I would do as a research scientist would be to create the models, to compose those scientific principles, to kind of write down, what did I find? What did we discover? And I think leading with that discovery, rather than like when we were all in school, we learned about Newton's laws on Monday through Thursday, and on Friday we did a lab to prove that they're true, that's backwards. We love seeing students start with discussion, then move into investigation, and then finally end up with those core scientific principles, because that mimics what science is like when it's done by research scientists everywhere. And it kind of puts your students in an empowered place to feel like they can do science too. So how students approach doing science in OpenSciEd, I know I kind of just gave the drive-by. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper. So again, they start with experiencing that phenomenon. That's something that's puzzling, something that's unusual. Then they discuss their questions. Then they discover the information through those hands-on activities. And finally, we're going to end with composing those scientific principles as part of their lab notebook. So let's break each one of these down. Now they're showing up again for you. Let's break each one of these down. So the first thing is that students experience phenomena. So in one of the examples in OpenSciEd, the students think about what happens when you drop your phone. So my phone right now, I'm looking at it, it is cracked because I dropped it when I was getting out of my car yesterday. And that is a phenomenon that's meaningful for students. So I think every student, whether they've had a phone or whether they've just had a toy or anything that they've ever dropped and seen it break, that is an accessible phenomenon. And that's one thing that OpenSciEd really prioritizes, is making sure that the phenomena that students are asked to think about are things they've actually experienced. I know when I first moved into the middle school science curriculum space, I was visiting a classroom and I was asking a student about, it's kind of like when you take off in an airplane. And the student was like, I've never been in an airplane. And that made me realize, wow, I am drawing on a phenomenon that this student has never experienced. So as part of accessibility and universal design for learning, the OpenSciEd phenomena are accessible to everyone, whether it's a broken phone or a broken glass. Everyone has had the experience of dropping something and seeing it break. So that phenomenon leads the student to think, that's really puzzling. Why does that happen? We all know it happens, it's obvious, but why? What's the mechanism for the phone breaking or the glass breaking? So the next thing that students are asked to do is discuss their questions, and OpenSciEd makes use of a driving question board. And this is where we start with that central driving question, and we have students ask their own questions related to the driving question that give them ownership and ask them to think about related ideas. So sometimes you're going to get serious questions about, you can see some of these questions in here. Sometimes there are serious questions really related to what happens when there's a thick straw or a thin straw. What about when you use a thermos? Sometimes you'll get silly questions. So in, the astronomy space science unit, people are going to ask like, oh, what would happen if Thanos snapped his fingers and half the population went away? Sometimes I think I would spend more time on the silly questions than the serious ones, but it really lets students have a good time, feel empowered, and engage with the content more thoughtfully so that they can do science like scientists do. And we'll talk more about how the PocketLab notebook helps the students do this in a more accessible way when Jason comes on here in a little bit. The next thing that students are going to do is they're going to discover through those hands-on activities. So in the example of the unit where that anchoring phenomenon is dropping your phone and seeing it break, one of the first activities is actually pretty cool. The students are going to create, with the help of the teacher, of course, lab stations around the classroom with different types of materials that bend or break in different ways. And what they're going to do is they're going to take the tennis ball and drop it and see what happens to the item below. So in this example, I'm showing rice noodles with the tennis ball. They're going to drop it and see what happens to the rice noodles. And then over time, they're going to revise that activity to do it in a slightly different way, so that they can take their findings in the first example, try again, and see what happens if we drop the ball differently or if we create ramps. How can we change the way that the item breaks or bends? So using that discovery and giving them that hands-on experience, rather than telling them what they're going to learn, this lets them discover it on their own. So doing it just the way that a research scientist would do it and helping them make that meaningful to their experience of science. And then the last thing that they're going to do is they're going to compose that scientific principle. And in some classrooms, this can even mean composing it in their own words. So using it as a class to, we know what the scientific principle as the educator, you all know what it's supposed to be, but letting the students actually write it in their own words in their science lab journal can help it, once again, make it meaningful and make them feel like they have actually come up with this on their own rather than just being told what it is. And that helps them remember and retain that information so that when they experience it again in a later unit and again on their state standardized tests, they really understand what they've created. And you can see here, I've also added some little sticky notes on this scientific principle, because after they compose the scientific principle, the next step is to go back to that driving question board, to start over again, to ask additional questions, to see what questions have already been answered, to continue the scientific process and drive learning forward rather than just saying, we finished that unit and now we're going to move on to the next one, to help create a more continuous process so that the storyline of what students are experiencing makes sense. So when we think about what OpenSciEd looks like in PocketLab, I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, OpenSciEd is an open source curriculum, so I'll just use it open source. Why would I work with PocketLab to, make it easier? And that's really the reason why we recommend that teachers who are interested in using OpenSciEd give it a try through PocketLab. So OpenSciEd is an open source curriculum, is a lot of Google Docs, which can sometimes be overwhelming for educators to comb through the Google Docs. So we've put it in our interactive platform to make it a little easier for teachers to teach and easier for students to use. So our digital platform, which Jason's about to talk to you about, that can either replace or supplement a physical lab notebook. So the students can either do all of their work in the digital notebook app, or they can do some of the work in the physical lab notebook and then some of the work in the digital lab notebook. We also have a library of supplemental lessons, which Jason will show you. The lessons can help you hit those performance expectations again in a different way, whether that means they've done the hands-on activity in your classroom and then they're going to do a simulation in Notebook. The supplemental lessons really make sure that your students have multiple options of how they learn that performance expectation. So they'll see it in OpenSciEd in one way and in a supplemental lesson in another way. We also offer sensors, which Jason will talk about, and those lab sensors can replace or supplement the measuring devices. The really cool thing about the PocketLab sensors is that they provide the data live via Bluetooth into the Notebook app. So when you see just like a static line graph, that static line graph is sometimes not very meaningful for students, especially like at that 6th grade level when they haven't been working with line graphs for as long. Seeing the line go up and down as the G-force car goes up or down a hill can really help the students understand what they're seeing and what that line graph means, so that next time they encounter a static line graph, they really understand what the graph is telling them. And we have this modern and innovative digital platform. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jason so he can kind of give you a tour of what the platform looks like. So Jason, I'm going to stop my share and let you talk about what OpenSciEd looks like in Notebook.
Great. Thanks, Christina. So I'll share my screen and give you all a tour of PocketLab Notebook. Right. So this is PocketLab Notebook. If you haven't seen it before, I definitely encourage you all to check it out. You can find it here at app.thepocketlab.com. So you can create a free notebook account and explore our lesson library as well as our preview units of OpenSciEd. So you can find that here in the lesson library. So on this page, you'll find all of our content that's in PocketLab Notebook. So we have a couple hundred lessons in here from a variety of topics using PocketLab sensors, without PocketLab sensors, from our partners or developed by us. But here you'll find our OpenSciEd section. So we have units 6.1, 7.1, and 8.1 available for you to preview this summer. So this is the first units from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And you can view the full units and what they look like in their entirety in PocketLab Notebook for free. So open up 6.1 here. So in each of these units, you'll see that each of them are broken down into several lessons. Then each of those lessons is broken up into a few days of instruction. So these will vary from 1 day up to 4. As well as each lesson will have a teacher guide that's built in that shows you kind of how to teach this lesson. We also have some overviews here, getting started with OpenSciEd and PocketLab. So this is a great place to kind of see kind of a recap of some stuff we're talking about here in this webinar, but also just some how do you use this in your classroom and how can you explore it this summer. So there's some tutorial videos here. This is their OpenSciEd instructional model. In this format, this is kind of how lessons in Notebook look. So they're broken up into cards. These cards can have different content types like videos or images or other content types, which we'll show as we go through these. But we also link to places where you can get materials and kits, And then the teacher guides for each lesson will include the materials that you need for each lesson. So I'll go back. Each unit also has a unit overview. So we try to kind of take all of those Google Docs that exist in OpenSciEd's open source version and kind of make it a little easier to use by organizing everything just a little more clearly. So here you can find some of your getting started information for Unit 6.1. You can find links to the full OSE teacher handbook. This is an OpenSciEd webinar that covers covers Unit 6.1, as well as some of the resources that'll be helpful as you're first learning about what this unit is and as you're teaching it. And then in each lesson, you can find a teacher guide there. This will have all of your teacher materials for the lesson. So I recommend checking these out before you're going to teach the lesson, learning what this lesson is going to be about. Again, we tried to take all of these teacher materials and distill everything into kind of a more easy to digest way. So you can kind of read through these lessons top to bottom, learn what the lesson's about, what standard it addresses. And then we link to some of the more in-depth things like this learning plan, which is many pages long, and you can use that while you're teaching the lesson as a reference. But you don't necessarily need to see this right as you're learning what the lesson is about. We can have these slides embedded right in this notebook lesson. This one here is just for you to kind of get an idea of what this lesson looks like. We also link directly to the slides so that you can use them in your class. These teacher guides will include kind of more broadly what this lesson is about and what it's going to cover, as well as what it's not going to cover, so things that are beyond the scope of this lesson. It includes the materials that you'll need, any prep that you need to do before the lesson. So this lesson does have a lot of prep. Some of them, these will vary from 20 minutes up to a couple hours. Some of the kit providers that we link to can make this materials prep a little bit easier by doing all the preparation for you. So that's definitely something to look into. We also have overviews for each day. So this is the first assignment that you'll assign to students. Just a quick overview of what they'll do. Your link to the slides, link to a video that they'll watch, and then a link to a handout, which is optional. So we took all of the student procedures and all of the handouts and put them into a single notebook assignment, which you can see in all the student assignments. But if you'd like to have the handouts as printed handouts and maybe have students draw on paper instead of draw digitally, we include all those handouts as an option for you. So in this first lesson, I'll show one of the student assignments. So this is the lesson that you will assign directly to students so they can watch this phenomenon video here. This unit is all about light and specifically one-way mirrors. So how is it that you can look at this mirror from one side and see yourself, but on the other side, people might see all the way through it and see this person. So this first thing here, students can use their physical science journal to draw their what they notice and wonder, write their observations. Then they'll share with the class, talk with partners, and kind of discuss this phenomenon. Like Christina mentioned, all these units start with some phenomenon and then a lot of discussion to kind of develop questions and try to how they want to approach this investigation. Down here, students can create a diagram, which is their kind of initial thinkings of what's going on in this. So they can use this built-in drawing tool, and they can annotate this little diagram, draw arrows, label things as they'd like. And I'll show a little bit more how that works from the student side of things. And then students can compare diagrams and then come back with their class and discuss. So when you want to use one of these in your classroom, or if you want to make any edits, you can import these full units into your PocketLab notebook account. Again, you can create a PocketLab notebook account for free to explore these units over the summer. Using the full units during the school year is a paid subscription. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So you can click this Add to My Courses button to import this into your PocketLab notebook account. And when you import them, they'll go from the lesson library into your My Lessons page. So anything you add to your account from the lesson library will end up over here. So this is My Lessons page. So this is where you can see all the lessons that I've imported into my account. So supplemental lessons down here, or kind of standalone, any courses that you import. If you want to create your own curriculum or create your own courses, that's an option. If you want to create your own lessons, that's an option as well. Everything in Notebook is fully editable, so you can make any changes to these units. You can rearrange things, or you can drop in any of these supplemental content if you would like to do so. So we'll open up that first lesson again in lesson 1, day 1. So now this is the editable version. So I can click into any of these sections and make any changes that I'd like. So if, for example, you want to do all of your work in PocketLab Notebook instead of doing a physical science journal, you could add in a chart here. These are all of the different content types that you can add into PocketLab Notebook. So for example, I can add a table. I'll make this a 2-column table. Maybe this one would be I noticed, and this one would be I wonder, and this would be observations. So as a teacher, you can add these content and assign that to students, or students can create these tables themselves. So we included instructions for students to use a physical science journal, just because we think students shouldn't lose that experience of writing things down physically, listing their observations that way. And keeping a physical journal throughout the entire school year that they can keep track of all of their learnings as they progress through all the units. But again, like Christina mentioned, you can do all of their data collection and observations and note-taking in PocketLab Notebook if you'd like. So as you go through these, there are sections where you'll discuss with the class, talk with partners. This last section here, this class discussion, there's an option for students to respond directly in Notebook here. So students can respond to these questions either with their whole class. So all of the students' answers will show up on this in this card. There's a few other ones. So you can have a full class discussion like this. You can have students work in small groups, or you can have students answer questions individually, and you can do that all in the same lesson. So OpenSciEd often has class discussion and then group discussion and then individual responses all in these lessons. And you can assign this to students and have them be able to see their group's answers in these ones, have them just be able to see their own answers in the individually scoped cards, and see their entire class's answers in these class discussion cards. So that is one thing that PocketLab Notebook does differently. You can have these big collaborative cards as well as individual answers, all in the same assignment. And I can show a little demo of what that looks like when we get to the student side of things. So I'll show you how to set up classes and how you're going to assign these to students and create student accounts. So on the classes page over here, this is where you'll keep all of your classes organized. We do have an integration with Google Classroom, so you can import classes right from Google Classroom, or you can create classes from scratch by just clicking this Add Class button. Here I have, I guess this is what this would look like. You can add a name, period, subject, room. You can have students have an individual student code if you'd like. Otherwise, students will sign in with their names and a class code. So this is an example classroom with just a few students in it. This is the class code that students would log in with, and then they'll use their name exactly as it appears in this roster. To create student accounts, you can just add students here on a new line. You can just copy and paste a big list of students, and it'll create student accounts for all of them. And then here we have an example of a lesson that's been assigned to students. So we can see that this lesson is in progress. I'm getting a little bit ahead. To assign one of these full modules to students, you can do that from the My Lessons page. So I'll go back into OpenSciEd, and I'll take this second lesson here. So this group of assignments, and I'm going to click Add to Class. I choose this class here, and then so now we've added this module into this class. So when we're ready, we can assign any of these to students. I'll assign this one here. You can have students work in groups or assign them to individually. For OpenSciEd, recommend you assign them to groups, and students can still have individual response cards in those lessons. So I'll add a group. You can choose which students are in each group. maybe this one, students are working as partners, but at any time you can change these groups or move students around. I'll sign there. And then you'll have this dashboard where you can see students' progress as they work through this lesson. So now we can see that none of these students have started this assignment yet. So I'm going to go back into lesson 1 and look at this other lesson that's in progress. All right, so here we can see that these 3 students have started the assignment and that Thomas hasn't started it yet. These students are all in a group together. So we can click on any of these cards and see the students' work on those cards. So I could click on maybe Albert's diagram section. I'm going to actually move up here. So we can see here the students started work on this diagram. They drew a couple little arrows showing that this music student sees themselves and the teacher is seeing through this diagram. As a teacher, you can see these changes in real time as students are making them. You can add comments on these cards. So I could say great work. As a teacher, I could even add some more annotations to this diagram. So if I wanted to add something right on the student's work, I could add some text here, make some comment right here. And then as these students work on these lessons, if you want to see their full assignment, you can view it that way as well. And then this last section here, this is the class discussion. So any students that add their answers will show up here. So Albert says, if we were going to create a scale model of this phenomenon, what important parts we need? Albert said a one-way mirror. Catherine said we'll need 2 rooms, one with a student and one with a teacher. So if there's multiple groups all working on these lessons together, answers from every student will all show up in this whole class discussion. All right, one other thing I can show here. In day 2 of lesson 2, I can show you a place where students can collect some data using a PocketLab sensor. So before I send this lesson out, I can still make any changes to it and make any edits. I'm going to look at this one. I'm just going to scroll down. So in this one, students are going to be testing light scenarios in a scale model. Oh, actually, this is not the lesson that I thought it was. I'm going to go into lesson 3. So what happens when light shines on a one-way mirror? So we want to look at different light levels on this one-way mirror. So in this lesson, students are going to be using a light mirror to measure reflected light and transmitted light off of a one-way mirror. So they're going to be using a PocketLab sensor to measure light intensity. So there's all the procedure here for students to follow. And in this section, there's a place where students can connect their PocketLab sensor and record some data. So this is a PocketLab sensor here. I'm going to click Connect to PocketLab. I'm going to turn this on. And then once this is connected, I'm going to show how you can use a PocketLab sensor to measure light levels. So if you haven't seen a PocketLab sensor before, these are small sensors that fit in your pocket that can measure a ton of different things in the world around you. So right now I have a PocketLab Voyager connected. These are all of the things that a PocketLab Voyager can measure. There's a ton of stuff here, so if you haven't seen this, it might be a little bit overwhelming, but measures things like acceleration, angular velocity, magnetic field, barometric pressure, temperature, humidity, as well as light intensity, and several other measurements. The one we're interested in for this lesson in particular is light intensity. So here we can see a light intensity graph that is coming in real time. So just as my hand's moving around, the light intensity is changing a little bit. If I point this down just towards my desk, we can see this light intensity drop. If I point this up towards a window, you can see that light intensity increase. So students can use this to see how light intensity changes when they put PocketLab in different locations or in different orientations. In this lesson, as they're measuring that's light that's reflecting or transmitting through a one-way mirror, so they can put this PocketLab in different places and measure that light intensity. So you can record some data. Maybe this is pointing right at my window. Some small changes of my hand. I make this light intensity bounce up and down. I can save some data. So students can save their travels this way. So maybe this would be their light intensity that is reflecting. They could add notes about their observations here. They can also look at the average light levels across this period here. But that is a very quick kind of demo of how you can use PocketLab sensors to record data. But in general, we've added places, any place we can where a PocketLab sensor can be used throughout the units. So places where you measure temperature, you can use a PocketLab sensor, measuring light intensity, measuring, we also have another sensor that measures CO2, which is used in several of the units. So in general, we want you to have just one sensor that you can use to measure as many things as possible. So students can, once they learn how to use a PocketLab, they can keep reusing their PocketLab sensors throughout the year. So I'll just unpair here. All right, let's see, do I have anything else to show? One other thing, when you have one of these units, if there's any supplemental content that you want to add, so for example, in this unit, which is all about light intensity, if you find there's a topic that maybe students are struggling with and you want to add in a little bit extra, or if maybe you're not prepared one day and you need like a filler lesson just for one day, you can find things like that on the PocketLab lesson library that you can add into your classes to supplement OpenSciEd's curriculum. So one lesson that I've imported into my lessons is this PhET simulation investigating how you see different colors through different filters. So a little bit different than this lesson, than this unit, but a somewhat similar kind of phenomenon. So how does light interact with, or how does different lights affect what we see? So students can interact with this simulation right in PocketLab Notebook. There's procedures here that tell students how to do this investigation and answer some questions. So as a teacher, you can find lessons like these in our lesson library and assign them in to students as well. So on this classes page, if I want to just add in another lesson, you can click Add Lesson and select it. These are all the lessons that are in my Lessons page. And then maybe this fits into lesson 2 somewhere. I can just drag this in and then assign this directly to those students in those same groups. And then they can work on this lesson as well. So all of those lessons can be found here in the PocketLab lesson library. Again, that's where you'll find the OpenSciEd units. You can find all of our MGSS aligned content, as well as just a wide variety of content in here. Some of them will use PocketLab sensors. For example, this one is exploring potential and kinetic energy on a half pipe using our new sensor, a PocketLab G-Force, which is a little car that measures how fast it's going, as well as other things. PhET simulation lessons, as well as just a ton of other content in here. So I would definitely encourage all of you to create a free PocketLab Notebook account, explore the lesson library, and check out these OpenSciEd units. And with that, I think we'll bring back Christina and Cliff and answer some of these questions that you've all been asking this whole time.
Awesome. Great job, Jason. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Well, there are probably like 50 questions that have come through the chat. So we probably won't get to all of them, or we will not get to all of them. Some of them have kind of been answered. And some of them are great questions, but they need some more context. And I wouldn't say we could provide the exact answer with the level of context that we have from just that was in the chat. So they're all very valid, and please reach out to us, and we would love to get into depth with your question, and happy to do that. That's what we're here for. But some of them, they'll be hard to answer in this rapid fire that we're about to go through. So I'm going to start from the beginning, and I'll take some, and I'll otherwise pass them out to who I think might be able to answer them best. From Ann Pember, is PocketLab Notebook free? Jason, go.
So there's a free version and a paid version, but you can use PocketLab Notebook for free to check out any of these OpenSciEd preview units this summer, as well as browse the lesson library. The paid version, Notebook Pro, is required if you're going to purchase curriculum. And I think Christina can talk a little bit more about pricing specifically. But yes, there is a free version of Notebook that you should definitely create an account for.
Great. Christina from Derek James, how can students seriously add to the scientific community? What research can students do that can realistically get published? If not research, data.
Yeah, I think that's a really big question. I could probably go for another 40 minutes on that. I think if students are interested in research, the best strategy is to help them get in touch with a local college professor that's in the field that they're interested in. College professors are always looking for people of all ages who are excited to participate in research. So if you have students that are interested in education research, that is my field. So please send them my way. And but other than that, I would definitely say to start with the curriculum that helps them get in that mindset of doing science. And if they show interest, put them in touch with a professor.
And we also have citizen science projects that we enable with PocketLab. One of them being Heat Island Project. And you can go on our website for more information on that. Students go around and measure temperature data that gets used in real research done by Georgia Tech University. So that's one way. And another question from Ann Pember, are the units discrete since NGSS is for the grade band 6 through 8? NGSS goes further than that, but for OpenSciEd, it is 6 through 8. And school states teach the standards in different order and trajectory. How are the units embedded in the curriculum map? So that's a very good question. It depends on your state, obviously, as you mentioned. And we have worked with teachers in states across the country. So yes, we can provide information on how to take OpenSciEd and match up with the scope and sequence of your particular state. So Anne would need to know where you're from. But as an example, Louisiana does things out of sequence, and they add in their own state standards, particular units that to supplement the overall OSC curriculum. And so we are experts in that and can help you along that path. Ingrid Goth, is OpenSciEd project-based? Are there culminating projects in each unit topic? Christina, do you know?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is project-based learning, especially in the sense that anything where students are starting with the discovery and centering something around a broader question is project-based in itself. There are culminating projects, and there are different ways to use them. They can be used just within a unit, or you can use them as sort of that big culminating, how can I, my students become broader citizens. Jason, I know you also have a lot of experience with the OpenSciEd content. Do you want to add anything to that answer?
Yeah. So there are, they're all around the same kind of phenomenon, and then you'll kind of build on those, making models or doing kind of upping your investigation as you progress through the units. I guess another thing that's in each unit, there's at the end of each unit, you generally try to apply what you've learned about this phenomenon to a different phenomenon, either in an assessment or in some other kind of project. So you do kind of culminate in that way.
Great. Kimberly Alpers asks, I teach virtually. How would the hands-on experience work? Notebook is really good at doing that virtual remote activities. We use it a lot during the shutdowns in the pandemic There's a lot of details to go in there, and it sort of depends on how you want to approach. And if you like, are students doing data collection, do they have sensors, or does just the teacher have it? So we would love to get into that, but there's a lot to unpack there. And then Jennifer Foreman asked, does PocketLab integrate with Canvas? Yes, we have ways to do link sharing that work with any platform. And we have a more tighter integration with Canvas coming this fall. So yes, there are ways to do it now, and it's getting better here very soon. Bruce Kammerer asked, is there a built-in drawing tool? Which I think we answered, and Jason showed off the tool very quick. It's very robust, free drawing, and collaborative. It kind of works like Jamboard. So everybody in a group can be drawing simultaneously on that card, which we didn't have time to go into. But we're
Cliff, just to add something, I think both to the drawing tool and the way that the notebook platform works, I think it's really important when I teach, and I know when a lot of people in the chat are teaching, when those discussions come up, there are students that I know are thinking and they're engaging with the content, but they don't have that extrovert energy to raise their hand and join the discussion. I think something that's really cool that makes Notebook more accessible to all types of learners is that ability to contribute to discussions and drawings and lab groups without having to speak up and raise your hand. So I think that it's part of universal design for learning, and PocketLab's Notebook really contributes to that part of OpenSciEd.
Awesome. 100% agree. Tony Rose Gonzalez asks, does I assume OSC, align to Cambridge International curriculum? And I would say it aligns with NGSS. And I'm not that familiar with the Cambridge International curriculum and what kind of aligning you might need to do to map NGSS to that. Christine, are you familiar with the Cambridge International curriculum?
I'm not familiar with that one specifically, but a really great thing about OpenSciEd is the ability to move things around, especially in Notebook, which makes that really easy. So being able to map the performance expectations in OpenSciEd to any other, whether it's a different states, I know some states don't use NGSS, or different countries, it makes it pretty easy to move around. Yeah.
And I think there's some other questions in that vein, talking about province standards. So I assume that's from Canada. So the answer to all those is OSU was designed for next generation science standards, the most widely used US science standards. And I am sure there are ways to map it to your standards, but reach out and we would love to talk more with you about that. Julia Materi asked, can I use PocketLab with Schoology? And the answer is the same as with Canvas, that yes, there are ways to do link sharing. And yes, there is a way to do it now, and it's getting better in the fall as we add tighter integrations with all these other LMSs and platforms. Can I use PocketLab with Google Classroom? That's from Areta Benian. Yes, that is already supported, and you can pull in your classes from Google Classroom, and students can use their Google login to get onto Notebook. So that is fully implemented. Debbie Nelson asks, is it easy to combine lessons if you need to move through something more quickly? Jason, would you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, all the lessons are fully editable. You can just take content from one lesson and move it into another one. So if you need to condense something together, or even if you want to add an extension to one lesson, you can totally do that.
I'm only like a third of the way through the question. All right, Bruce, we're going to go to like 3-word answers. Bruce Kammerer asks, how easy is it for students to access prior work graded or ungraded in later lessons? Jason, you want to take that again?
Yeah. So we tried to add sections in Notebook or in the student procedures that say, like, if you need to go back to, assignment 1 from lesson 1, those will all be pretty clearly marked. But then also, in Notebook, pretty easy for students to navigate and go find all of those lessons, try to label them as best we could.
Thank you. Kristen Irwin asked, do teachers have the ability to edit the OpenSciEd lessons in PocketLab? Yes, and hopefully, probably that question came up before Jason did that demo. Sarah Yee asks, is there a revised materials list for using PocketLab census? Yes, please reach out to us. We have that documented, and we are working with the kit partners to develop a PocketLab specific kit. And all the lessons that go into notebook support either way. So there's the canonical way of doing OSE that they originally came up with, and then there's also a version where you're, like Jason showed, you're using like a PocketLab Voyager to collect light or temperature or CO2 readings, whatever the lesson calls for. Jody Louie, do you have, this was Canadian curriculum. Hopefully we answered that. Christy Scranton asks, do you need a paid account for students to use PocketLab? And I think we've somewhat already covered that, but yes, to access OSE and to use it for your year of teaching, you're going to need a paid account. There are ways to preview it for free to try before you buy. And you can use the supplemental lessons with like on the free account.
So just to add to that, I'm going to drop my email into the chat here in just a few minutes when we get through some of these questions. But I have noticed a lot of questions on what do I have to buy? What do I have to do? How do I get this? Which is really great. You're welcome to contact me for more information. But I think something that PocketLab's offering that is a really big advantage is very transparent pricing. So there's not, how many students are you going to roster? Let's go through and count them. There's no activation fees, there's no setup fees, and there's no requirement for multi-year subscriptions. It is $650 per teacher per year. We do offer discounts at volume for large district adoptions, but if you're just one teacher and you want that on your own, the only thing that you would pay is $650 per teacher per year. The PocketLab sensors are optional. You don't have to have those to make OpenSciEd work. There are other options for you. If you want to take a look at those, there have been a lot of links dropped in the chat for where you can find individual sensors or larger bundles of sensors. And of course, you can always reach out to me and I'd be happy to work with you individually on a quote for your school or for your classroom.
Great. Very well said, Christina. Thank you. Bruce Kammerer asks, final question, ... Final question for you, not for everybody else. Not that OSE is making large-scale changes, but how will PocketLab version be kept up to date as changes are made by OSE? And Jason is in charge of that, so it will be made and managed by Jason, I think is the short answer, and we're tabs on that.
Yeah, they send us spreadsheets with all the changes they make as they make them, and then I get to go in and make those changes. Yeah,
and it's a very close working relationship that we have with OSE, and they are very involved in the maintenance of their curriculum. So don't worry, you will not miss an update. If students are blocked from YouTube, can you access the OSE videos? This is from Aaron Burkhart. Yes, I think there are alternative video hosting sites that OSE has those videos on, and we support that. Sarah Yee asked, can the teacher view in real-time student recordings in the notebook? Yes, and Jason demoed that. Ingrid Ko asked, do students have to have a device for every class to take notes and explore content? I guess not every student needs a device. You can work in groups, but this is a digital delivery of the content. So hopefully I'm understanding that correctly. Patricia Huntington says, can you explain what exactly the subscription adds to the free access? We did that. Free versus paid. Here, Abdullah asked, what kind of reporting does PocketLab provide? And Jason just started to get into that. And you want to give the quick summary of that again? And I'll tease out non-redundant questions so we can get through.
So what was that question one more time?
What kind of reporting does PocketLab provide? So student progress.
Gotcha, yeah. So you can view student progress kind of in real time. You can see, student changes live. There's also, options to add commenting. We're adding a more in-depth grading feature this summer, so that's coming soon. So you'll be able to, score answers and add more in-depth feedback that way.
Great. Rachel Kenning asks, are student names, emails, or other private information shared with PocketLab? And in general, no. and we don't take emails. There is some kind of name that a student uses to log in, but that can be an actual name or an alias. And otherwise, there's no other private information. And if you use like Google Classroom, for example, we don't have any information. We just get that all from Google Classroom. So we try to limit what we know about students, and generally that's almost nothing in terms of signing on. Does PocketLab integrate with ClassLinks or other SSO platforms? Yes, some, or not ClassLinks specifically, but yes, we do have other sign-ons available and many more coming this fall. Corrine Corbett asked, can we give feedback to students inside of PocketLab? Yes, and Jason, you want to add a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on that already, but you can add comments. You can even add extra sections to students' assignments. You can, make any changes you want, and students will see those in real time.
Yeah, great. The question is still coming, so we're still only halfway. Can partners see what each other are working on? This is from Amanda Thistle. And yes, every card, you can scope it so that it can be individual work, or you can have class-wide discussion so everybody can see it, or within a lab group. And hopefully you saw that as Jason was going through an example lesson. There's a lot obviously there to unpack, but it is a very powerful feature of Notebook, one that is unique to Notebook from anything else that I'm aware of. Kyle Pong asks, will the paid content include all 18 of the OSE units? Yes. Will they be ready at the end of the summer? At least half of them will, at least the first 9 units. So 6.1 through 6.3, 7.1 through 7.3, 8.1 through 8.3. And the latter 9, we hope to have it. That is somewhat dependent on the OSE certification process. So yes, we're working through it as fast as we can with our partners. And at the very least, the first semester will be there in August, and probably more than that. Kristen Irwin asks, is there a quote unquote, self-grading tool, or does the teacher have to view each student's work and grade individually? And I assume that means self-grading means automatically grading. And yes, there are some automated grading features in Notebook currently, with a lot more to come. And this is with ways to automatically give formative feedback in these checks for understanding, or however you might want to use these cards. So yes. Bruce Kammerer, I thought you said you did your last question a while ago. Is there a way to see thumbnails of all the drawings from different students? Not thumbnails, but you can click into the individual drawings and see them. Ann Pember, can you clarify the difference between embedding the OSE lessons in Google Classroom versus using PocketLab? And yeah, let me give this one, and I think all three of us can touch on this a little bit, because this is an important distinction. OpenSciEd is an open educational resource. That means you can access it for free. It was developed by large grant funding from places like the Gates Foundation and the Carnegie Foundation. And so as part of their mission, and the reason to fund it is that it is open source. We have worked with many teachers and many instructional coaches of trying to implement the open source version of it. And there's a lot of room for improvement and ways of like actually using it in the classroom, and some of the nuances and the details of doing that, which are many. So yes, you can use it out of the box, but there are a lot of improvements that Notebook brings in terms of organization, collaboration, integration with our sensors, and being able to pull in supplemental materials, easily edit and rearrange. So we believe there's great value in that. In the same way, like something like Linux is an open source operating system, but you still get Linux from people like Red Hat, because there are improvements to that open source materials and ways to deliver it that really improve the experience. So that's our perspective on it. And Christina or Jason, you want to add comments?
Yeah, I think, and I know we're about out of time. So what I really think is that at PocketLab, we don't really think that we know what's best for your classroom. We really trust our teachers to make those decisions. And that's why what we've offered is a flexible platform with these full abilities to edit, to move things around, to use supplemental lessons, while making it easy for you to implement. So it is possible, certainly, to edit Google Docs and to make it work for you. But what we want to do is empower you to get science curriculum to your students in the simplest, most flexible way possible. So I think that's really the driving force between what we're trying to do with OpenSciEd. We want to make sure that you have access to the highest quality curriculum that really gets your students thinking about science like scientists, while still making it your own. We don't think that an out-of-the-box solution is right for your classroom, because only you are in your classroom. So you're the one that knows best for what your students need. So if you want to talk about how your classroom would look, what would happen in your classroom using OpenSciEd, using Notebook, using our PocketLab sensors, I would love to talk to you. I've dropped my email in the chat, and please send me an email and let's set up a time to talk. I want to learn about what you're doing. We're always trying to make our programs better, make our sensors better, make Notebook better. So we want to make everything we offer better to help you teach the way that you know is right for you.
Yeah, perfect. Well said, Christina. So we're at an hour, and I've been told to keep going, to continue working through the questions, but I won't take it as personal offense if anybody needs to run. But if your question hasn't been answered, and we will finish out these questions, or you want to hear what other people asked, but just want to acknowledge that don't feel compelled to sign off if you need to. Okay. Amanda Thistle asked, do the sensors work with Chromebooks? Yes. Caitlin Elliott, what can you measure without additional sensors? How much are additional sensors? So there's a range of costs, and what can you measure? You can, without the sensors, well, you can use the Notebook and all of the digital tools that it has, things like PhET. And then you could do OSE in the way that it was written. So you can use a meat thermometer to measure temperature. You can use use any of the measurement equipment that is otherwise prescribed in the kit. So to do other measurements, you need the appropriate PocketLab sensor. So if you go on our website, we have 5 products in the PocketLab family, with more to come. And so they have a price range, and they're different use cases. Kimberly Elpers asks, are there formative and summative assessments to use with the lessons? Very good question. There are, yes, there are assessments with the lessons. There is OSE has a particular way of doing assessments according to their pedagogy. But yeah, there's something at the end of the unit that's kind of a longer assessment, which you could use as a summative assessment. And but it's, in my opinion, it's not like a traditional test that you would generally see like in a textbook, like an end of unit test. They take what I think is a different approach to it. And then, yes, in some of the units, there are embedded formative assessments. Anything to add there, guys? Cool. Daniela Iona Sakarelis, is it the same sensor for each unit? No, some units require different sensors. So, for example, this is our air sensor, which has a CO2 measurement capability, which you would use this for one of the units. And Jason showed our PocketLab Voyager, which you could use for a number of the other units. And then we've also mentioned a few times PocketLab G-Force, which is our newest sensor. This you could use for some units. And there's different combinations of sensors that you could use depending on how you want to approach it. And if you teach 6th through 8th grade, or if you just teach 7th grade, so reach out to us and we would love to advise on those questions. Suzanne Salatis asked, for Google Classroom, if we grade a notebook, does it talk back to Google Classroom? Again, there's not, OSE doesn't have grades probably in the way you traditionally think of like a textbook and a curriculum. So yeah, there are, and in Notebook, you could put scores, but reach out to us. It's a little bit different than like your typical, like, here are the questions in the back of a unit, and we're grading those questions, just in how the curriculum is implemented. Will PocketLab make a specific OSE sensor bundled by grade level? Yes, we are having bundles, and that are, yes, a grade level bundle that would meet your specific needs. So please reach out to us for more specifics. Julia Fajardo asked, do OpenSciEd labs contain open-ended questions? Let me throw that to Jason, because I've been talking a lot.
Yeah. Yes, very definitely. They're mostly open-ended questions, almost all open-ended.
Yes.
You could always compose different styles of questions if you want to assess your students in different ways. Again, the opportunity is there to make it your own. Just what OpenSciEd provides is almost all open-ended questions.
Yeah. Colleen Morse asks, is there a timeline for release of OSE units? Yes. The first 9 will be ready in August for sure. And then that would be 6.1 through 6.3, 7.1 through 7.3, and 8.1 through 8.3. And then the back half 9 will be ready sometime in the fall. And it's somewhat dependent on the certification process, but we're working through that as quickly as possible. So yes, that is our timeline. Aaron Hughes asks, my state's science, Utah curriculum doesn't follow NGSS in the same order OSE teaches them. Can the units be taught in a different order? How quickly will all the units be available? So I think answer the last half. And Christina, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so OpenSciEd can be moved around. You can teach it in a different order. Like only the first 9 will be available before fall, but the remainder will be available about in the middle of the fall semester. So there are a few things you kind of have to keep an eye out for to make sure that you aren't teaching something right before the student was already supposed to know that thing. So there's a little bit of homework to do. We can work with you on where to keep an eye out for those things, but it's definitely doable. And in fact, we encourage people and teachers to do what works for your classroom, even if it's not exactly what's out of the box.
Great. John Ramsdell asks, in my district, we have 4 standards. One is a reading standard. Does OpenSciEd have resources and assessments that are connected to Pocket Notebook? I'm not sure I fully understand that question, but yeah, please reach out and we can help with any of the standards alignment. He also asked, can you connect PocketLab to Infinite Campus? I'm not familiar with what Infinite Campus is, but please reach out and we can provide information there. Jean Borman asks, can read-write app be used to read text aloud, text to speech, or speech to text? So PocketLab Notebook is usable with screen readers, and it is has been audited to be fully accessible. So I assume so. I'm not particularly familiar with read-write app, but I would say probably yes. And in general, we're screen reader compatible. Lucia Proietti, is it possible to use the notebook adapted to Florida state standards? Yes. And again, the OSE is based on NGSS, and we can help map that to your particular use case. But yes, there are certainly ways to adapt it for your state scope and sequence. Did I cover everything?
I think
Surely
so.
not.
one other question was Lika. This one's an interesting one for maybe Christina. I don't know if you know, OpenSciEd for high school. I think what somebody asked, has OpenSciEd been used for high school? This is, Lika. Has any teacher used OpenSciEd for high school?
I'm sure that there are educators who have used the 8th grade curriculum in a high school setting. I know I've worked with a local high school that uses the 8th grade program for their 9 through 12 remedial science. It could be adapted to be more advanced. OpenSciEd is working on high school curriculum now. That's slowly being developed. And once it's completed, it will also be available in Notebook.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered most of them. If we didn't cover your specific question, please reach out to Christina, and she would love to help support you. And in general, we're here to help teachers and educators of all kinds to make your lives better and your teaching more effective. So please reach out, and we're happy to help. So a couple housekeeping things before we sign off. You can go to the Notebook, create a free account so that you can check out the first 3 units of OFC 6.1, 7.1, and 8.1. They're live inside of Notebook right now. You don't need any kind of code to access it. Just go create your account, poke around, and you can see how we've implemented and get familiar with the platform. The professional development certificates, if you need them, they will be emailed out after this webinar. So look for an email, and there will be a link there to go grab your certificate. And then for all of you guys, we've talked about open educational resources in this webinar. We're going to have a whole conference about it. So Science is Cool 9, our conference series, is coming back on August 5th. And we will be talking about free and low-cost science education resources. So we will have people from OpenSciEd, as well as a whole bunch of other open source and low-cost lessons and full-bore curriculum companies talking there. And so follow the link in the chat if Scott has posted it there, which I think he has, with the 2 fingers, and sign up. That'll be August 5th. These are great events. We have thousands of people attend each one of them, and it's a very lively conversation. So we'd love to see you there. So with that, I'd like to thank you guys all for your attention, and thank Dr. Mitchell and Jason. And we are here for you. Please reach out, and we'll see you hopefully soon, hopefully August 5th, where we'll go into more depth. Thank you, everyone.